Welcome back. There is a practice in the yogic community called spinal breathing. It's a wonderful practice. It's a great way to do meditation. And yet there is a problem in the philosophy and in the associated philosophy of Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. So I want to get into that problem so you don't step into this pitfall, especially as you may be trying to introduce Om Japa in your chakras, which I explain a lot on this channel. So let's get into it. So the idea of spinal breathing is I'm going to imagine that my breath is going up and down my spine. I'm just going to breathe in and imagine it's rising up my spine, and then I'm going to breathe out and imagine it's lowering down my spine. That in a nutshell is spinal breathing. You do that over and over and over again. And what the yogi is trying to do is trying to get in touch with the actual signals that are shooting through the nervous system, telling the breath to go up and down, telling the diaphragm to go up and down. All of that, there are signals going through the body. And so eventually the yogi will actually feel those signals. So he becomes interiorized and he starts to notice the processes which were already there, which were already ongoing. And now he actually feels them and he says, this is energy. I feel it as an energetic signal running through the body. And so the yogis felt all of this. And so they said, well, we are perceiving three channels. The Ida, the Pingala, and then there's this other one, which is different. So one is hot and one is cool. The Ida is cool and the Pingala is hot. So they felt these two nervous systems, right? One is hot and one is cold. And then they said there's another one which seems to be in between, and it is neutral. And they called that the Sushumna channel. They felt the energy running through that neutral channel that's in between the hot and the cold. And they said, this is a really nice channel, and it's different. It's different. It's not activating as the other two tend to be. It's not so outward. So the yogis say, if you want to be successful in business, well, then you've got to stimulate, you've got to run energy in the Pingala and be aggressive. If you want to be very creative in art, then you need to run energy through the Ida, because the Ida is very cool and creative. That's what the artist is doing. They're very, very cool and creative. But then if you want to be a yogi, you have to be introverted. You have to be deeply, deeply detached and recessed inside of yourself, just watching everything go by like a movie. And that deep channel that they found was the Sushumna. And so people hear about these three channels. They say, oh, this one's bad and this one's bad and this is the only good, and I'm doing my spinal breathing. And they get this idea, I've got to pierce the Sushumna. I've got to get in there and pierce the Sushumna, and I've got to force my way up. And so they make the breath really hard and really strong, and I'm going to suck it right up, right into the brain, you know? And there's this idea of force that gets in there. And they're trying to force their way into the Sushumna so I can get up towards the higher chakras in the brain, right? And even if there's a little bit of that idea of I've got to wedge my way into the Sushumna, just a little bit of that idea over years is enough to stress out your Kriya practice. It is enough to stress out your meditative practice. It's enough to awaken the sympathetic system. And if you're awakening the sympathetic system, which of those three channels are you awakening? The Pingala, the hot one, the aggressive one.
Belloc staff is too long. They're digging in the wrong place.
So that's the sympathetic system. And anytime we use this idea, I'm going to force my way in, even if it's a very light, tiny little idea that you're harboring somewhere in your subconscious, over years it will frustrate your practice. And so I've sat down with a lot of yogis that I teach Kriya to in the initiation. And I told them, you got to throw this idea out. And I just want you to flow with the breath. Flow with the breath. And as you're flowing with the breath, chant Om into the chakras. Flow with the breath. And so what happens is you begin to flow with the dorsal vagal complex. And how do we make that happen? With the longer out breath. That's what really stimulates the dorsal vagal complex. So now, if your breath is even, okay, you've got an in-breath that's this much and an out-breath that's the same amount. That means an even breath, right? It's still possible to awaken the dorsal vagal complex if the breath is long enough. Now, it takes a long enough time. Then it will still stimulate the dorsal vagal complex. But most of us are a little bit out of whack, and we got to get back in whack. And so lengthening the out breath will stimulate the dorsal vagal complex all that much more. So just by making the breath long, you're going to right away stimulate the dorsal vagal complex, which is akin to the yogic sushumna, okay? So those two are like this. They're the same thing. The dorsal vagal complex is the sushumna. It's the same thing, okay? All right. So that's what we're awakening, and we flow with it. It's not that we're trying to jam our way into it. We just flow with it, and by flowing with it, it activates more and more. It activates the freeze response in the body. The body might get numb. It might get very cold. It might get very cool. It might get very tingly. All of these are part of the 4 proofs, right? And so you flow with that dorsal vagal complex, and it draws you into the upper nervous system, up into the brain, and you have this wonderful meditation. So what are we entering into? Well, it wasn't the sushumna that we were entering into. It's a crossing of the brain. We're going from identification with the left brain into identification with the right brain. And that's the actual entering into the cave. So the yogi might see the spiritual eye. And that's a charged connective tissue between the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain. It just lights up, and it's lighting from the area of light in the brain, which is the right hippocampus. So it's as if the right hippocampus is casting a shadow for you to walk through. Now, if you're a neurologist, you're going to say to me, but Forrest, there are currents crossing through the brain all day, left and right. That's exactly right. But we are heavily identified with the processes of the left brain. What processes? Memory, time, the body map, and the body hallucination. Those 4 things, we are heavily identified with those in the left brain. And we have to retreat from that. We have to soften that. We have to let go and surrender from that momentarily to cross over and begin to identify with the process of the right brain. And what process is that? Expansion. Unbounded expansion. That identification leads to a non-dual state. So there's a dividing line between absorption and samadhi. So if you're floating and you feel your body and you're just, you feel everything around you. So you're getting some expansion, right? Because you're just, energy might be shooting through your body and shooting into the universe, and you're watching the energy and feeling the energy into the universe around you, into the air around you maybe. That's a little bit of expansion. So now we're getting a little bit of absorption. But when you lose that body, your awareness of the body, just the body is gone, just totally gone, and your consciousness, your awareness is floating in empty space. No breath, no body, right? Well, now you've crossed that dividing line and you're in the realm of samadhi. So if there's no breath and if there's no body and you are expanded and you are consciously aware, you are in a samadhi. That's the crossing line. You have exited the left processes of the left brain. You have exited them momentarily. This is samadhi therapy, right? We exited the left and we entered and identified with the right brain in expansion, in just pure expansion, no body, no breath. That's a samadhi experience. So there's lots of different samadhi experiences, so don't get hung up on somebody else's samadhi. If you find your consciousness floating in empty space, that was a samadhi. And hallelujah, you touched it for a moment. Maybe it was only a second. Maybe that second was actually an hour, because we lose time, which is a process of the left brain in identification with the right, in samadhi. And so all of that happens very easily. It's a 1-2 process. 1, flow with the dorsal vagal complex. 2, identify with the right brain. So we kind of float up the spine. We roll up into the brain. And so that would include the roll up. It would include the tranquil breath, and it would include the freeze response. Those 3 things are what put us on the edge of being able to identify with the right brain in a non-dual state. So first we flow, and then we jump. We jump into the right brain by inducing the right brain, by letting go of the left and inducing the right. And so that's why all these yogis talk about surrender, letting go. Let go of the ego, because you're letting go of these particular processes. There's no death. The you, which is your consciousness, is just identifying with the right. That's it. So it's a 1-2 punch. It's a jab and a right hook, right? So that's all we're doing, and we're never trying to squeeze our way in, because that will create tension, and a little bit of tension will frustrate the entire process. So we have to let that go. We have to let go of all of the tension we possibly can while maintaining our conscious awareness. And that's the magic. It's so magical. I love yoga. It's just so magical. So I hope you love this. If you did, be sure to hit that bell down below so I can see all of you